Most people die rich in regret and poor in legacy. They spend 40 years collecting paychecks, upgrading houses, buying comfort they mistake for security, and when the end finally comes, they leave behind numbers in a bank account. Numbers that vanish within a generation. But Machiavelli never asked how much a man earned. He asked something far more dangerous. What did you build that will outlive you? Because money that disappears when you do was never really wealth. It was temporary relief dressed in an expensive costume. Real wealth doesn't die with the man who created it. It expands after him. It protects people he will never personally meet. It operates silently across decades, unseen, untouchable, and impossibly difficult to destroy. That is what we are going to build today. Not income, architecture, not a paycheck, a dynasty. 21 rules. Cold, precise, Machiavellian. Let's begin. Rule 1. Stop building around yourself. The most dangerous trap in wealth is making yourself the engine. When your income depends entirely on your presence, your face, your talent, your energy, your daily decisions, you haven't built wealth. You've built a machine that starts the moment you do, and it will stop. Age, illness, death, irrelevance, one of them will come. Always. Machiavelli understood that power built around a single person is the most fragile kind of power. The moment that person weakens, the entire structure collapses. So the first move is to remove yourself from the center. You build ownership, not employment. Businesses that operate without your daily presence. Investments that compound while you sleep. Cash-flowing assets that don't require your face or your voice to function. The question shifts entirely. You stop asking, how do I make more money? You start asking, how do I build something that generates value without me? That distinction separates the wealthy from the truly powerful. Because the day your system can run perfectly without you, that is the day you've achieved something most people never will. Not just success, permanence. Rule 2. The inheritance that actually matters. Every man who builds something wants to leave it behind. That instinct is noble, but the execution is almost always catastrophic. Passing money to someone who was never conditioned to protect it is not generosity. It is a delayed destruction. You are simply choosing the generation in which your empire collapses. Machiavelli saw this pattern everywhere. The founder sacrifices everything. The second generation spends carelessly. The third generation inherits nothing but stories. 3 generations, and the entire structure disappears. Not because enemies attacked it, because softness entered from within. So the real inheritance is never the money. It's the psychology that created it. You raise your heirs like commanders, not consumers. You expose them to responsibility before they are ready for it, because readiness only comes through exposure. You let them experience scarcity before they ever touch abundance. You introduce them to difficulty while you are still alive to observe how they respond. And you watch very carefully, because pressure reveals character faster than comfort ever will. The heir who can rebuild from nothing is worth 10 times the heir who inherited everything and learned nothing. One of them will protect your empire. The other will quietly dismantle it while believing they're living well. Your properties and investments are not the true inheritance. The way your bloodline thinks, that is what survives or dies. Rule 3. Never reveal the architecture. There is a reason the most powerful structures in history operated quietly. The moment people understand the source of your power, they begin calculating how to reach it, how to challenge it, how to dismantle it. Visibility is not success, it is exposure. And exposure is the beginning of vulnerability. Machiavelli was explicit about this. Power that is understood becomes a target. Power that remains hidden survives. So the Machiavellian approach to generational wealth is architectural invisibility. Let the world see the results. Never let them see the machine producing those results. Let them assume it came from luck, timing, talent, or inheritance. Never correct them. Your assets are never centralized. Never sitting under one visible identity. One exposed business, one traceable account. Everything is layered, legally layered, geographically layered, operationally distributed, so that even if one structure is attacked, the rest remain completely untouched. You are not building a castle, visible, impressive, and directly attackable. You are building a maze. Only those who are specifically trained can navigate it. Rule 4. Protect the empire from those who love it most. Machiavelli was never sentimental. He understood something most people refuse to accept. The greatest threat to your legacy is rarely an outside enemy. It is the person sitting closest to it who begins to believe they deserve access they never earned. Spouses, children, business partners, relatives who watched the empire grow and quietly concluded that proximity equals entitlement. The emotional trust is not a protection strategy. It is a liability. The Machiavellian approach is structural. Estate plans designed like fortresses, not suggestions. Prenuptial agreements that protect bloodline equity from outside dilution. Trusts with behavioral conditions. Access earned through conduct, not simply through birth. Ownership structures where wealth remains protected even from the heir who becomes incompetent, reckless, or emotionally compromised. You do not build a dynasty based on hunt. You build it assuming that human weakness will eventually surface. Because it always does. And when it does, the structure must be stronger than the emotion trying to break it. That is not a cold philosophy. That is the only philosophy that produces legacies which survive. Rule 5. Your hustle cannot be inherited. This is the truth most creators refuse to hear. Your charisma cannot be passed down. Your work ethic cannot be transferred by will. The audience that built your income owes nothing to your children. And the moment public attention shifts, which it always does, the income that depended on that attention disappears with it. Modern wealth has a fatal flaw. Too much of it is personality dependent. Built around creators, influencers, founders whose identity became the product. Remove the person and there is nothing left. Machiavelli would never build an empire around applause. He built around permanence. The next rule is simple, but most people never apply it. Your income must survive your disappearance. That means boring businesses serving permanent human needs. Cash-flowing assets that don't require your name attached. Intellectual property held inside structures, not under personal identities. Investments compounding quietly in the background while everyone else chases the next trend. Trends die. Algorithms shift. Audiences move on. But systems built around necessity survive generations. Stop performing wealth. Start engineering it. Rule 6. Test before you trust. Machiavelli watched kingdoms collapse because powerful men made one catastrophic mistake. They assumed their children were ready before they were. An heir who receives power before developing the character to hold it is a disaster waiting to happen. The inheritance becomes the weapon that destroys the empire. So the Machiavellian solution is deliberate and ruthless. You test heirs while you are still alive to observe the results. You give them responsibility before you give them resources. You put them in situations where failure carries real consequences. Not because you enjoy watching them struggle, but because struggle is the only reliable teacher of character. Let them manage something small. Let them fail at it. Watch how they respond to the failure. Do they rebuild quietly? Or do they make excuses? Do they take ownership? Or do they blame circumstances? Because how a person responds to small failure is exactly how they will respond to catastrophic failure later. You also teach them the dangerous things. How to sit across from someone who is trying to manipulate them and say nothing. How to make a decision under pressure without needing approval. How to read contracts, understand leverage, recognize when silence is more powerful than speech. Your job is not to hope your heirs become responsible after receiving power. Your job is to make irresponsibility structurally impossible within the system you leave behind. Rule 7. Build in silence. The modern world rewards visibility. Followers, recognition, documented success, viral moments of achievement. The culture has convinced people that building loudly is the same as building powerfully. Machiavelli would find this deeply amusing, because what most people call influence, he would call exposure. And exposure is the enemy of durability. The more visible your empire becomes, the easier it is to attack. Envy finds it. Regulators notice it. Competitors study it. And those who wish to destroy it suddenly have a mat. Real dynasties do not announce themselves. They expand quietly. Wealth concealed beneath legal structures. Control operating through systems rather than public personas. Influence moving through relationships rather than headlines. The longer the world underestimates the scale of what you have built, the safer your empire becomes. And by the time anyone fully understands what exists, it is already untouchable, too established to dismantle, too layered to attack at any single point, too quiet to have provoked enemies when it was still vulnerable. Let the world chase applause. Let your bloodline inherit protection. Rule 8. Entitlement is the slowest poison. Most empires are not destroyed. They are dissolved, gradually, from within, by one specific poison. Entitlement. The heir who believes the throne belongs to them automatically becomes careless with it. The moment someone feels ownership without having earned it, discipline disappears. And without discipline, structure is only a matter of time before it collapses. Machiavelli never rewarded existence. He rewarded execution. If your heirs want access to what was built, they must prove themselves worthy of it. They must learn the system before benefiting from the system. They must observe before they are permitted to control. They must contribute meaningfully before they receive significantly. And if they fail at this, they rebuild. Without emotional rescue. Without automatic privilege granted simply by bloodline. You make the family name feel heavy. Not like a gift. Like a responsibility. Every dollar inherited should feel like pressure, like something they are now personally accountable for protecting. That psychological shift is the difference between an heir who becomes a guardian and one who becomes a consumer. Softness disguised as love destroys dynasties faster than poverty ever could. Rule 9. Build systems that survive chaos. Most family wealth doesn't disappear because of external attack. It disappears during moments of internal emotional collapse. Divorces, unexpected deaths, sibling conflicts that turn legal, addictions, sudden decisions made by the least capable person in the room during the worst possible moment. Machiavelli understood that emotions are not a foundation. They are a weather system, unpredictable, powerful, and capable of destroying any structure not specifically designed to withstand them. So you never build a wealth structure dependent on emotional stability. Succession plans written and legally finalized long before they are needed. Voting rights clearly defined in governing documents. Asset protections that trigger automatically during crises without requiring a family meeting. Rules established in advance so that no argument, no grief, no greed can override the system during its most vulnerable moments. The difference between ordinary wealthy families and generational dynasties is exactly this. Ordinary families react emotionally to crises. Dynasties operate structurally through them. Because if your wealth depends on future family members making good decisions under pressure, eventually, someone won't. And one catastrophic emotional decision can destroy decades of disciplined construction. The Machiavellian solution is not called. It is simply prepared. Rule 10. Never build what can be seized. Fragile wealth is not wealth. It is a temporary illusion of security. If your assets can be frozen overnight by a lawsuit, if your empire can be exposed and divided in a divorce proceeding, if a single political shift can legally dismantle what took decades to build, then you never truly controlled it. You simply held it temporarily, under conditions that others controlled. Machiavelli would never leave an empire exposed to a single point of failure. The architecture must be layered endlessly. Trusts, holding structures, jurisdictional diversification, insurance mechanisms, legal separation between individual identity and asset ownership, multiple layers between the person and the wealth, so that attacking the person does not automatically reach the wealth. The paradox of true power is this: the strongest empires appear smaller than they actually are. You do not personally own everything you control. You control structures that own everything. And that distinction, the difference between personal ownership and structural control, is what separates families that survive crises from families that are destroyed by them. When chaos arrives, and it always does, the man who built for appearances loses everything first. The man who built for continuity survives, quietly, exactly as planned. Rule 11. Think past your own lifetime. Most people plan one generation ahead. The ambitious plan two. Machiavelli would consider both approaches short-sighted. The true legacy builder plans for descendants he will never personally meet. He builds structures designed to survive 50 years of human weakness, political change, economic collapse, technological disruption, and generational transition. That shift in thinking changes every single decision. The question is no longer how do I make my children comfortable? It becomes how do I create a system capable of protecting people I will never know, in a world I cannot fully predict? This is why the strongest dynasties create family offices with professional governance. Why perpetual trusts exist in legal architecture. Why land is held inside foundations rather than under personal names. Why governance structures are established that outlive any individual within them. Every generation faces the same choice: become a temporary participant inside someone else's system, or become the guardian of a structure that continues writing its own future. Real legacy is not emotional. It is architectural. And the people who understand this stop thinking like workers and begin thinking like civilization builders. Rule 12. Silence is the highest form of protection. The loud become exposed. The quiet endure. Machiavelli understood this as a law of power, not a personality preference. When your empire begins growing, the instinct, particularly in the modern era, is to become more visible, to document success, to share the journey, to perform the wealth you are building. Resist this instinct completely. Lower your profile deliberately. Reduce your digital footprint. Minimize public association with the structures feeding your bloodline. The less people understand about what you actually control, the harder it becomes to target. Let influencers chase recognition. Let celebrities accumulate visible wealth. Most of them will spend their entire lives performing success instead of protecting it. And eventually, that visibility will convert into vulnerability they never anticipated. The Machiavellian moves differently. He walks through the world almost like a rumor, present but undetectable, operating but invisible unless necessary. His wealth becomes infrastructure, a system that works on his family's behalf across time, regardless of whether his name is ever mentioned again. Real wealth doesn't need applause. It needs continuity. Rule 13. The empire must function without the emperor. If your presence is required for survival, what you built is not generational wealth. It is a successful career with an expiration date. Machiavelli never created structures dependent on one man indefinitely. He built systems capable of operating without him. Processes, hierarchies, trained operators who understood their function within the larger architecture and could execute it without requiring emotional guidance from the top. The transition from founder to architect is the most important shift in legacy building. You stop being the center of the machine. You become the designer of the machine. You stop making every decision and start building the systems that make decisions correctly without you. That requires training operators, not fans. It requires developing strategists, not followers. It requires building process-driven structures that don't collapse when the founding personality disappears. Because personality always disappears eventually, the machine must not. Rule 14. Separate what the world sees from what actually protects you. Machiavelli would have understood modern influence instantly. You would have grasped the leverage of social media, personal branding, public positioning, and audience trust. And then he would have built a complete wall between that influence and the actual wealth structure behind it. Because fame is exposure dressed as power. It feels like protection until the moment public sentiment turns against you. Until a government decides your visibility makes you a convenient target. Until a lawsuit weaponizes your public profile in ways you never anticipated. So the sophisticated approach is two parallel systems. The visible layer, influence, relationships, audience, reputation, opportunity. This system operates publicly and generates access. The invisible core, the actual architecture of wealth, trusts, structures, holdings, cash flow systems. This layer remains protected behind legal and operational distance, entirely separated from the public identity that might someday take damage. If the public layer is attacked, the invisible core survives untouched. You can be publicly known while remaining privately untouchable, but only if you are disciplined enough to build this separation before you needed it. Rule 15. Build modular, not monolithic. One business, one industry, one country, one income stream. That is not security. That is concentration. And concentration is fragility with excellent branding. All it takes is one significant disruption, one lawsuit, one regulatory shift, one economic collapse, one technological displacement, and everything built around a single pillar collapses simultaneously. Machiavelli would never tolerate this level of structural vulnerability. The Machiavellian builds modular. Different asset classes, different jurisdictions, different business sectors, multiple income streams operating independently while still supporting the larger structure. Think of a spider's web. When one section is damaged, the rest continues functioning. The entire structure remains operational because no single section was responsible for holding everything else together. This is how dynasties survive wars, recessions, political collapse, and generational transitions. Nothing depends entirely on one decision. Everything is compartmentalized, protected, and capable of realignment under pressure. True resilience is not confidence. It is preparation. Rule 16. Protect the meaning, not just the money. Money without identity eventually dissolves. Human beings need meaning as much as they need resources. When future generations do not understand what the family name actually represents, the values that built it, the sacrifices that protected it, the philosophy that governed it, they gradually rewrite it according to their own preferences and contemporary pressures. And that is how dynasties become diluted. Not through catastrophe, through slow compromise, one generation at a time. Machiavelli understood that stories outlive structures. So if you want your legacy to survive, your bloodline must understand what the name means. Not through motivational speeches, but through documented principles, clearly defined values, non-negotiable standards of behavior, a code that articulates the philosophy behind the empire, the behaviors that preserve it, and the behaviors that destroy it. You leave behind more than assets. You leave interpretation, a philosophy that future generations can align themselves with even centuries after your death. That is how loyalty survives across time, not through obligation, but through identity. Rule 17. Make everything conditional. This is where Machiavelli becomes genuinely ruthless. Never allow your heirs to believe victory came automatically through birth. Let them feel protected, prepared, and loved, but never let them believe that access to the empire is guaranteed regardless of their conduct. Access must be connected to responsibility, to performance, to demonstrated character under pressure, to contribution to the larger mission. Because unconditional inheritance creates passive consumers, and passive consumers eventually destroy what disciplined builders created. The structure itself must reward competence over entitlement. Future generations should understand with absolute clarity. Inheritance is not a finish line. It is the beginning of a responsibility. They must prove themselves worthy of continuing. That mindset, that hunger, is what keeps dynasties alive across generations. Comfort destroys them. Hunger preserves them. Rule 18. Delay power. Accelerate discipline. The modern world gives people access too early and preparation too late. Young heirs inherit significant wealth before they have developed emotional regulation, strategic thinking, or genuine understanding of what it costs to build what they are receiving. They inherit the result without understanding the process, and so they treat it like a destination rather than a responsibility. Machiavelli would never permit premature access. He would delay it intentionally, not as punishment, as sharpening. Power arises in stages. Responsibility first, control later. Each level earned through demonstrated execution, consistent discipline, and loyalty to the mission rather than simply to personal benefit. When access is earned, rather than simply received, people value preservation differently. The empire stops feeling like free comfort. It becomes sacred accountability. And that psychological shift changes everything about how a person protects what they now hold. Rule 19. Own time, not just assets. Most people spend their entire lives exchanging time for money. Even many wealthy people remain trapped inside systems that demand their constant presence and attention. The Machiavellian understands that the deepest form of wealth is sovereignty over time itself. The moment your income becomes structurally independent from your daily labor, your position in life changes completely. Assets work while you rest. Systems operate while you remain absent. Capital compounds without requiring your emotional involvement in every decision. That is not luxury. That is leverage. And every heir must understand this principle early, because the person who masters the construction of self-operating systems stops being vulnerable to urgency, panic, and market trends. Patience becomes leverage. Stillness becomes strategy. And time becomes the most powerful asset in the portfolio. You are not trying to become the hardest worker in the room. You are trying to build the room that works hardest without you. Rule 20. Teach the language of wealth. Money is not mathematics. It is a language, one with its own grammar of psychology, law, negotiation, incentives, and human behavior. Most people are functionally illiterate in this language. They spend their lives inside systems they do not understand, paying taxes they could have legally minimized, signing contracts with terms they didn't fully read, making financial decisions driven by emotion rather than structural logic. Machiavelli would never allow his heirs this vulnerability. He would make them fluent. They would understand how trusts function and why, how contracts are structured and where the leverage actually sits, how tax systems work, and what the architects of great wealth have always known about navigating them legally. How human psychology creates financial behavior in markets, in negotiation rooms, in family disputes, and in the decisions of governments. Because once you genuinely understand the language, the world stops manipulating you so easily. You begin seeing the architecture behind events that used to feel random. You understand why certain laws exist and who they were written to protect. You recognize patterns that appear chaotic to the financially illiterate, but read is completely logical to those who speak the language. Real fluency, not basic literacy. Fluency. Rule 21. Burn the blueprint after the empire is complete. This is perhaps the most Machiavellian principle of all. Once the structure is stable and the core architecture is protected, stop revealing the process behind it. Not because secrecy is romantic, because predictable power is vulnerable power. If outsiders fully understand how your empire operates, they study it, replicate it, or find the weaknesses in it. If insiders know every shortcut, future generations become intellectually lazy, inheriting formulas instead of developing judgment. So you teach principles, not exact paths. You transmit mindset, not dependency. You leave philosophy, not step-by-step instructions. Every generation must solve part of the puzzle themselves. That obligation keeps intelligence alive within the bloodline. Because what people figure out personally, they protect fiercely. What they inherit passively, they eventually waste. And this is the final transformation. You are no longer building wealth. You are building continuity, a structure capable of surviving ignorance, betrayal, emotional chaos, political disruption, economic collapse, and the inevitable march of time. Not a fortune, a fortress. Not visibility, control. Not temporary success, permanent structure. And when you finally disappear, there will be no dramatic ceremony, no desperate need for public validation. Only silent systems continuing to operate exactly as designed, quietly protecting generations who will never fully know your name, but will live every single day inside the protection you built for them. That is real generational wealth, not wealth designed to impress strangers, wealth designed to survive history itself. If this changed how you see the game, even slightly, then you already understand something most people will spend their entire lives missing. Subscribe, because what you heard here is only the surface. The deeper layers are waiting.